The events in Europe greatly concerned some Americans as Hitler's Germany became more and more aggressive. The Neutrality Act was revised after Germany invaded Poland. The United States began selling arms to warring nations on a cash and carry policy. In other words, if you could come and get it, the United States would sell you the items. Now, this was partially to prevent something like the Lusitania from happening. Instead, the countries that were coming to buy goods from the United States were taking the risk. For the first time, there was a peacetime draft. We officially were not in war. So it was pretty remarkable that the United States puts together a draft. Now, if you watch and if you look at many of these comics, political cartoons, you should notice that there's some very strong similarities to children's stories. And in fact, if you look in the lower right corner, you will see Dr. Seuss. He was a political cartoonist as well as a cartoonist for children. Now, FDR had won his third term. The United States was slowly putting its foot into the water to warm up to the idea of war. And Roosevelt, for the first time in American history, won a third term in office. Great Britain was running out of money, fighting against the Germans, and Britain needed our help. Making wartime goods stimulated the American economy and assisted European allies all at the same time. So FDR and Congress adopted a policy of lend and lease. In other words, we would lend items of war and such to any country whose defense was vital to the U.S., and we would also be able to lease military bases and such. This was a pretty important factor, in particular for Britain, who didn't have the money. So we would loan them ships and ammunition. Makes sense, right? I mean, because we know we're going to get them back after the war. No, it was completely bogus. Nobody really believed that Britain was going to return any of the ammunition that we loaned her, but it benefits the American people. The United States kept edging toward war. Just like in World War I, German U-boats traveling together, now known as wolf packs, became a threat to American military and trading vessels. Hitler invaded the Soviet Union and ordered maximum cruelty against its civilians in the Soviet Union. And this really gets the Soviets involved. The brutality was absolutely outstanding. I mean, it was almost unbelievable. Hitler believed in rounding up entire Russian towns as the German military came through and machine gunning them into a hole, into a pit that they had dug, basically a mass grave. Even though the Jews were targeted, yes, they were targeted by the Germans, Russians were pretty high on the list as well. Now, in response to all this, in September 1941, the U.S. Navy was granted permission to attack German submarines in self-defense. However, the United States was plunged into war on December 7, 1941, when the Japanese military launched a surprise attack on the military installation in Hawaii, the largest U.S. military installation in the Pacific. The U.S. had broken Japanese secret communication codes and knew that there was an attack coming. However, we didn't really know where the attack would occur. Many experts believed it would be in the Philippines, which is very close to the rest of the Pacific countries that Japan had taken over. In response, the United States had moved ships from San Diego and the West Coast to Pearl Harbor to ensure that we would be ready when or if Japan attacked, so we would be closer to the Philippines. The attack on Pearl Harbor was completely unexpected at this location. December 7th was a Sunday. Japanese airplanes hit around 7:55 a.m. on a Sunday morning. People completely unprepared for this. 2,403 Americans were killed and 1,178 were wounded. It truly is a date which will live in infamy. This is what Roosevelt calls it. And the attack prompted American support for declaring war. I'm going to play you a little video clip of FDR declaring war, asking Congress, talking to Congress after Pearl Harbor.
Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan, was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. Indeed, 1 hour after Japanese air squadrons had commenced bombing in the American island of Oahu, the Japanese ambassador to the United States and his colleague delivered to our Secretary of State a formal reply to a recent American message. Japan has therefore undertaken a surprise offensive extending throughout the Pacific area. The facts of yesterday and today speak for themselves. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God.
The United States made a big splash as it declared war against Japan. In return, Germany declared war against the U.S., and millions of men and women joined the U.S. Armed Forces. The Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, aligned themselves against the allied nations of Great Britain, France, the USSR, and then after Pearl Harbor, the United States.